Welcome to my show, simply entitled Women Influencers. I am Veronica Malolos, CCIM, founder and CEO of the Capstack Group of Companies, providing commercial real estate development, brokerage, and property management services in the greater Orlando area. Today's guest is Jenny Fielding, empath founder, investor, and operator of global venture capital firm Everywhere Ventures that invests in startup tech companies still in idea stages, and now author of Venture Everywhere. Please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe below. I welcome your comments and please share with someone who can benefit from this podcast. Hello, Jenny. How are you today, all the way from New York City?
I'm good. It's a little cold here, but things are going well. Thank you.
Well, it's the tundra right here in Florida, even though it's only 55 degrees. We Floridians, we don't know what to do with cold weather. But I'm so happy that you are here with us today, Jenny, because I think you've got a great story to tell. So if you don't mind, I want to just dive right in and ask you about how you grew up in your environment and how you got to where you are today.
Great. Well, first of all, Veronica, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on your podcast. My journey is not a linear one. So, I think this might be a little different than some things that you hear. But I call myself an accidental entrepreneur, an accidental investor, and now an accidental author. And so I started
love
off
that.
very different from where I am today. So very traditional. I went to law school. I worked in finance at a big bank. And at some point, 2007 it was, I had an idea to change the world in some small way. I didn't really even think of it as a startup. I just thought of it as a different way to, approach the world. And I ended up, in my living room, as many entrepreneurs do, kind of hacking on an idea. And that idea became a startup. And that startup grew to, over 100 people. I had to quit the job at the big bank. And that was how I ended up as an entrepreneur, completely by accident, what I call an empath founder, someone that was trying to solve a problem that they had, not to try to be a startup founder, but to just see the world in a different way. And I ran a few companies and ultimately ended up on the other side, investing in companies. And so I've had a really interesting career, both very corporate, then startup founder, and now as an entrepreneur running Everywhere Ventures. So my fund is really a kind of accumulation of all my life's work, traveling around the world, meeting inspirational founders, and being the first kind of backers in those incredible entrepreneurs. So we invest small amounts of money into idea stage projects, all in technology and all across the world. And so we invest in the US, but we also invest in places like Africa and LATAM. And I've really been able to take kind of all my journeys and traveling from, around the world and channel that into what I do for work. And people started telling me those stories were really interesting. And so I recently wrote a book called Venture Everywhere. And I kind of lay out some of these principles of things that I've learned along the way and inspirational founders that I interview in the book. So that's a little bit about my journey.
Wow, I love it. And by the way, I love the title of your book, and we could talk about that a little bit more. But I was curious, Jenny, about who shaped you as a child. For instance, you said you went to law school. Did you grow up in a family of lawyers, or even, So, yeah, I'd be curious to find out about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. My family, everyone did professional things, but they all worked for themselves. So the model I saw growing up, my father was a doctor, my mother owned a business. My grandfather was an accountant, but he didn't work at a big business. He worked in his basement in Brooklyn, right? So the model was really figure out a life where you can control your own destiny. And what was weird was that I took a very different approach, right? I went very traditional to law school, and then I worked at a big bank. But I think deep down, I always fancied myself an entrepreneur because I was an ideas person. But I take a lot of influence from my family, especially my grandparents, who were all entrepreneurs in different ways. And I think secretly inspired me. So now people say, like, of course it makes sense. You had this, this support, you just didn't realize it. But somehow I took a more traditional path at the beginning.
Now, what about you writing a book? Was that something that you've always wanted to do, or is that
Is that something that you grew up with as far as expressing sort of thoughts and ideas down on paper? Tell us a little bit about that.
No, as I said, accidental. So one of my inspirational people growing up was my grandmother. And my grandmother took me on many great trips. And one was this train trip across Europe. And we stopped in, many incredible places. And we just had adventures together. And she really taught me to explore the world, to be open-minded, to have empathy for different cultures. And I think that exposure really shaped a lot of things I've done in my life. I've traveled to 100 countries. I've invested in founders in, I think, 30 countries. And so, my mantra is really like, get on a plane. And I run a fund called Everywhere Ventures, right? And so we believe that innovation is everywhere and we want to be where the best entrepreneurs are, wherever they are. So marry those two things, the inspiration of my grandmother and kind of all those experiences with these incredible founders who've built places far from the glow of Silicon Valley. They've built they've built companies in Pakistan and in the Philippines and in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I wanted to shine a light on some of these entrepreneurs who maybe didn't come from such privileged backgrounds, that really had to have conviction and resilience to get to where they are. I think in the tech world, we don't really hear about those. We kind of hear about the usual suspects. And, the truth is there's such rich stories around the world, and I wanted to bring that to everyone. So it started as just a fun project of writing down some of the experiences I've had going to different countries, and it accumulated into a book. So the book is 12 countries, 12 chapters, 12 entrepreneurs who've kind of shaped their industries in the countries that they're in, and what we can all learn from those experiences. So that's a little bit about Venture Everywhere. And actually very excited. So the book publishes on March 4th, but started to pre-sell already, and I'm very excited for the book to come out.
Well, I'm definitely buying your book because it seems like a really, really, really great subject. And I always really am curious about people who have a heart for international, right? Because it's a world outside of us. And certainly, like you said, there's so much talent out there, which really is a great segue to my next question about influence. And so I imagine that your influence probably had many, many outcomes that you're very proud of. So if it was just one outcome that you had influence on that you're most proud of, what would that be?
Well, as I mentioned, a lot of the entrepreneurial activity and, let's say, capital has been constrained in places like Silicon Valley. So the thing I'm really proud about is kind of having a different thesis and really kind of seeing the world holistically. And so when we look at our portfolio, it's quite diverse because we're investing in founders from all different places and all different perspectives. So while female founders, for example, command only 2% of all the capital that goes into venture capital, in our fund, it's more like 30%. So we don't have a focus on, this kind of let's go find certain types of founders. It's just that our networks are so diverse and we're meeting these incredible entrepreneurs. Our pipeline is so full that I'm really proud that we've been able to make a difference in kind of the entrepreneurial composition, shall we say. And when we look around at our founders, they just have incredible experiences that are not all the same. So that's something I'm quite proud of.
And you've spoken a little bit about women founders, and of course this podcast is all about women influencers. And so, it's really amazing when I hear my guests talk about their impact, not only on things outside of what you normally would hear about, but most especially because of the fact that women founders are probably like a small minority, right, of in the world. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, if there was one challenge that comes to mind that you overcame, what would that be?
I think sometimes when you're in a very traditional setting, working in law and at a bank, leaving the comfort of, like, say, corporate or what the status means is really kind of tough. So I tell everyone I actually bootstrapped my first business. I was working full time at a bank, and nights and weekends I'd come, back to my apartment and start working on my startup. And so the challenge I really faced there was having the kind of confidence in myself to leave corporate America and to invest in myself, invest in my business. And so it was hard. And it was hard because I didn't have like a lot of people pressuring me, but I think you kind of think of yourself as one way, you've been educated in a certain way, and to really break free of that and say like, none of that stuff matters. What matters is, your mission in life and fulfilling that. And it kind of took a little bit of time to get there. And I've seen this pattern myself a few times. So it's kind of similar when I decided to start my own fund. I'd kind of incubated it while I was working at another fund, nights and weekends, and I kind of needed a little push to really go out there and just embrace it. And I think that, those moments you kind of look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, wow, I have one life to live. I have to do what I was put on this earth to do and not fulfill someone else's dreams or what people, think I should be doing. So I'd say that's a challenge that I'm still kind of working through and hopefully getting more kind of confidence in myself as I go.
Oh, I'm so sure that people in the audience listening to this are saying, "Yeah, that's exactly, what most of us have been challenged with, right?" And like you said, just breaking away from the tradition may be a challenge, but it can be done. And you're like the perfect example for that. So thank you for that. So let me ask you, Jenny, if there was one piece of advice that you could give our audience today, what would that be?
Yeah, I think along those same lines, chart your own path. Only you know your true north, and you can make that dream a reality. You just need to believe in yourself. So it took me a little bit of time to kind of realize that, and so my piece of advice is just have a yearly kind of check in with yourself of like, are you doing the work that you want to do? Are you living the way that you want to live? And you don't necessarily have to have huge changes like quitting your job, but small incremental changes can make a big impact. So I think believing in yourself is my advice.
Oh, that's great. I mean, the pursuit of happiness, isn't that really what at the end of the day, you do this thing that you enjoy. You never have to work a day in your life. I think that's, yeah, tremendous. Okay, so we've come to the portion of our interview where you get to ask me a question. So please go ahead, Jenny.
Veronica, I'm really looking forward to this because I want to know if there's one piece of advice to give a new podcaster. You seem to have, done an incredible job building your audience, and you have a real point of view, and you have consistency, which seems like that has given you a lot of success. So, for someone new starting a podcast, what advice would you give them?
Well, thank you for the question, Jenny. And nobody ever asked me that question before, so I appreciate that so much. I wanted to say, firstly, don't give up. If you're going to start a podcast, keep going because it does take time to build an audience, to make sure that you have, sustainability. It is tough because there's a cost involved in it. You really have to be so committed to it, but for me personally, well, one of my personal values is curiosity and adventure. And so if you build a podcast based on a passion of yours, I think that you will always be guided by that passion and so therefore have good results. And so for me, I was always just motivated by the fact that I think that more of us women should be able to inspire other women or provide some sort of another venue for us to be inspired and to get really good lessons from other women like you who are so successful, because someone out there might be listening and saying, oh, well, that makes a whole lot of sense, will that help me? So start with your passion, stay in there, stick it out, make sure that just like what you did, Jenny, you want to make sure that you're prepared and you bootstrap because it's not an inexpensive project. You need editors, you need coaches, you have to invest in some equipment. So this is really what I would suggest to anyone who is thinking about doing a podcast. It takes a long time before you can build yourself up to where people can find you and work with professionals too. So I hope that that suffices. And thank you for the question. I want to ask you, Jenny, if somebody in the audience wanted to buy your book, could you tell us a little bit about where they can find it, how they can buy it?
Yeah, so you can pre-order the book on Amazon or Barnes& and Noble or wherever your favorite bookseller is. It'll arrive on March 4th. And I really wrote this book for all the entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, and people that just want to live their life differently. So I hope that people enjoy it.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'll enjoy it because I'm going to buy it for sure. I love, love, love that you have put all these stories in a book. And for anybody out there that's listening, I think it's really worth just purchasing and reading this book. I'm sure you'll get a lot of good insight into startups and entrepreneur and everything else that you've covered in that book. So I want to thank you, Jenny, for the time that you've spent with us. I really, really enjoyed this interview, and I'm sure that our audience probably are going to enjoy it too. So thank you again and stay warm. And I'm sure that hopefully we'll cross paths, and I will definitely read your book.
Thanks so much, Veronica. It was really fun.
Thank you.